Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
With that, let's go to, we were going to do, I'm sorry, I was transitioning to Mike's item, but Mike is the third item. So, all right, speaking of local, let's talk about...
Speaking of looking for plumbers on Google.
Yes, exactly.
Google came out with its annual economic impact report. I think it was within the last week, but I think it was just synchronous with our last podcast, so we didn't talk about it then. So this is a thing they've done annually since about 2012.
2009.
Well, they had done a couple of years prior to that, but I don't know if they were actually annual. But anyhow, they've been doing it for 12 years ish, 13 years, and they publish this report online, and there are archives that you can look at for each of those years. In 2019, I believe, they started publishing the number of businesses for whom they made connections through driving directions, phone calls, and website visits, which we assume is sort of verified Google business profiles. And so I was very curious. First time I'd seen Google actually reference that number anywhere, and I guess I'd missed the last 3 or 4 years where they had announced these originally. So I went back and I looked through the archives of each of these years and tried to suss out when they started doing this. 2019. So in 2019, they reported each of these numbers by state. So I went through and I added up all the states, and this also includes Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia as well. So there's 16.7 million businesses with, again, we presume claimed Google business profiles in 2019.
I don't think they're claimed. This is total.
You don't think they're claimed?
Yeah. No, I don't think I don't think that's
roughly
limited.
Half are claimed. Right.
I don't think it's limited to being claimed.
Yeah. Then my theory for where I'm going with this holds even more true. So 2019 there were 16.7 million profiles. 2020 17.3 million. 2021 20.2 million. So that was probably the huge increase in people starting businesses during the pandemic. Potentially,
or there is an alternative theory for that too, but I'll let you finish.
Which we'll get to. And then this year, or the most recent year that Google reported, 2022, down to 18.7 million. So a loss of 1.5 million Google business profiles. And so there are a couple of theories for this. By the way, Mike pointed out that the U.S. Census data for new business formations in the last couple of years does not mirror that trend. That the trend line has continued to go up to the right. So despite the fact that there are more businesses starting today, there are now fewer Google business profiles than there were a year ago. So there's a couple of theories for this. The first one is that Google has removed a lot of spammy profiles. And Mike, maybe this is where you were going with this particularly if they're not claimed. I had thought even potentially ones that were claimed, that they were just cracking down really, really hard. And that particularly in service categories that the number of even verified profiles might have dropped as a result of this more draconian policy.
So and then 2021, just to flesh that out a little bit, 2021, they had virtually no support in place. Their whole support team was decimated. Things took months and months to take place. And my theory is during that period, spammers took wild advantage of it, to which over the last year or 18 months, they have responded and essentially suspended every service area business and forced them back through re-verification, thus purging who I would suggest it could explain this whole number, but maybe not.
So the other theory is potentially that Google business profiles absolutely have been central in the new small business owner's mind over the last 4 to 6 years anyway, since Google has been making this big product push with GBP, and that Google a couple of factors, Google pulling back from its product experience, dedicated product experience for businesses to claim and manage, first of all, might have harmed some of its market penetration. And then the second thing is potentially that we're seeing this sort of erosion of consumer search behavior for younger searchers over to TikTok or now potentially to these other chat related search engines that we might not, that Google just may not be as central, just as it isn't for younger searchers. It may not be as central to the sort of default web presence for a lot of younger entrepreneurs. Interestingly, I spoke with one just in the last couple of weeks as part of my Prosper Portland Mercatus engagement, younger entrepreneur who is, has a very much a viable cleaning business, but also is a part-time student. And she was like, oh, I'm crushing it online. I have all these people reaching out to me on Instagram. Still wasn't aware that that she could actually go to Google and set up a profile. And so I think that we may just be seeing the sort of combination of factors in terms of a heavier crackdown on spam, Google sort of reaching this level of market penetration and thinking that they had this segment nailed, and then this lack of investment of resources over the last year and a half may actually be coming back to bite them a little bit. So a bunch of different theories, but I thought the numbers in and of themselves were pretty interesting, that there are 1.5 million fewer business profiles at the end of 22 than there were at the end of 21.
Well, go ahead, Mike.
So I went as an orthogonal resource in this. I went to DataAxle, which is Info USA's data publishing arm, and they have a public site that declares. And then I went to Wayback Machine and some emails where I've communicated them in the past. So for DataAxle, during these same timeframes, 2019, when Google had 16.7, DataAxle, I think, had 16.3 or 4 million businesses. In 2020, DataAxle had 17.3, roughly the same as Google, a little bit less. And in 2021, 17.3 million. And in 2022, when Google had 18.7 million, they had 17.5 million. And DataAxle historically has run a little bit less than Google because Google's a little looser on SABs than DataAxle is. DataAxle allows them, but is a little more rigorous in terms of which ones actually count. So the difference.
DataAxle tends to, I think, undercount sort of solopreneurs who, like this client I'm working with, where they have a business, but they also do something else. I don't think DataAxle is ever going to find this particular business in their system.
Right. And to some extent, the Census Bureau tends to count many more of those, or even businesses like Near Media that are virtual businesses. They don't really do anything locally, that are, incorporated an LLC, but don't really have a location or a need for a Google business listing. The Census Bureau counts a lot of those. So the Census Bureau is going to have significantly higher numbers because of that as well.
Speaking of that, I wanted to bring that up. Speaking of that, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but it's 30 million plus for 2022 in the same period, with 98 plus or 99+% of businesses being small businesses. And so there's quite a discrepancy between the Census Bureau numbers, which are, real numbers on some level. It's not made up stuff, versus what we're seeing with Google and the DataAxle numbers. And presumably the Google numbers are not just physical locations. They include service businesses as well.
Right. But like I said, I think that all these independent contractors, anybody who's incorporated into a LLC or that do not have local business, or as David pointed out, are aware of the Google product, that's the other 12 million plus that are in the census. I don't see the numbers. Side
hustles or whatever.
Side hustles, right. I don't see the numbers I see them as counting different things. To me, the question is, it are the types of business that Google wants to count. In other words, people that have face-to-face interactions with local customers. Are those numbers going up or going down? And are their verifications going up or going down? Those are really
and they seem to be going down according to the analysis.
Well, they certainly went down for 2022. But when you look at 2022 compared to 2020, if you pull 2021 out as a COVID-related number where spammers had their day, and you can see that it was 2019, 16.7, 2020, 17.3, 2022, 18.7. That's a pretty linear number if you pull the 2021 number out. So it really depends on what happened in 2021 and what's going on. We don't know.
Well, and there's also, if you remember, there's also the Wix numbers, which are much higher still, which are the, who's got a website hosted by Wix, and those numbers are much higher than even the Census Bureau. And so we were sort of marveling at that when those came out a year ago or whenever it was. So let's, just final comment on this before we move on to you and local news, Mike. This is the perennial problem with with companies, SaaS companies or whoever is marketers targeting small businesses, is what is the addressable market, right? Who is really a customer? And in the Wix context, with the massive number that they had, it's anybody who needs a web presence for any reason. But in other contexts, it's the criteria are much more. There's a higher threshold, So the solopreneur is not going to qualify as a buyer of some certain kinds of services. So I think the small business number there is no single small business number. It's a number that's dependent upon what your criteria are and what your objectives are. And there are real implications for people if Google doesn't have, some huge number of businesses on it, right? It's like, where those businesses are missing, where do I go to find those other choices? Or it's the old Yellow Pages adage, if it's not in the book, maybe it doesn't exist or whatever. So if it's not in Google, some people are never going to find those businesses, except for, as you say, David, the younger people who are going to social media as alternative referral sources. And the reason your client or your mentee or whomever in that Prosper Portland program is on Instagram is because it's a lot easier for her to have an Instagram account than to manage a Google business profile. As we'll discover next week when Claire Carlisle talks to us about GBP as your secret CMS. But let's move on to...
And importantly, Google's decision to kill the actual Google business profile product makes that even more true.
Harder.
Instagram is even easier than managing a presence on Google now. So
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.